fascinating things you write about is what you call a cottage industry that denies that economic populism is actually about economics. Why is this?
People have a variety of excuses. One is that in the United States, very popular, it was less so after the 2024 election, to say it was all about race. Another common explanation is, those blue collar jobs are gone because of technology. It's delusion to think that they're anything but gone, as if that completely eliminates people's responsibility for ensuring good jobs for non-college graduates. Both of those are really flawed. And I think the reason that these excuses keep getting thrown up is something psychologists call identity threat. They're excuses that allow that group, my group, the Brahmin left, to say we don't have to listen to the voices of those ignorant non-college voters who are seduced by conspiracy theories and are tricked by the con man Trump. And it's an excuse why the Brahmin left can't hear the voices of the working class. It's an excuse they give to themselves.
So can you actually discuss with our listener your theory about why so many people fall for conspiracy theories, and in particularly the connection between this and actually Virgin Mary?
Yes. So in 1946, my mother, a Jew, married my father, a WASP. Their first argument was about the virgin birth. You have to admit that objectively, it's kind of unlikely that that happened. But just the fact that it is unlikely means that if you can persuade people to believe it, they have a lot invested in that way of approaching the world. Otherwise, they look kind of silly. And in many ways, I think the conspiracy, Stop the Steal, and the conspiracy theories had a similar dynamic where they were more a social bonding mechanism than a search for objective truth. And Stop the Steal is a great example. I mean, I think it attracted people who really felt they had been ripped off by an economy that actually, they're right about that, rips them off. And Trump is so adept at connecting with people that he kind of chose that phrase, stop the steal, that elided the difference between stealing the election, which of course didn't happen, and stealing their futures, which of course did happen. Over 90% of Americans used to do better than their parents. Now it's just an even shot. And the percentage of productivity that went to workers has fallen very sharply. And workers know that. Workers know that they've been ripped off.
So one thing I found fascinating about your book, and I don't know to what extent this is pure Bourdieu, to what extent is you, to what extent is both, and if you actually distinguish it for me, you do me a favor. But the fact that the reason why people of lower classes have a different sense of moralities and different set of value, different culture, that dichotomy culture versus economics is actually a false one, because different economic condition drive different cultural condition, and the emphasis on responsibility that we see among middle class and lower class people is driven by necessity. The reason why solidarity is so important is because you are in tough jobs that require your fellow people at the job to help you out and protect you in case there is a problem, in a way in which we Brahmin don't have, and so it's very easy to be condescending or look down to a different kind of morality, but in fact we need to understand that. So can you sort of explain that and tell me, is it, to what extent is Bourdieu, to what extent is you, and to what extent is both?
It's both Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, and my life. I mean, if you're growing up in a family where the good job, whether it's a routine white collar job or a blue collar job or a pink collar job, is that requires you to get up every day, get there on time without an attitude, and is not very intellectually stimulating, what you're going to try to inculcate in your children and yourself is self-discipline, the kind that can make you successful in that kind of job. And you're going to very highly value traditional institutions that anchor self-discipline, whether it's religion or the military or traditional family values, traditional gender roles. When Democrats had a very solid coalition with blue-collar families, both elites and blue-collar families shared a pretty traditional morality. I mean, my father was a New Deal Democrat. He thought feminism was ridiculous. And then my generation of hippies came in, and we saw ourselves in a very self-congratulatory way of trashing all outdated social structures, including gender roles. So, we were interested in social inequality and race and gender and climate change. And at that point, the culture of the Brahmin left became very different than the culture of the settled middle class, what we often call blue collar, but is actually the middle 50%. And that culture clash is what created culture wars. And then the right learned how to weaponize those culture wars to pry workers away from liberal parties. And meanwhile, unfortunately, all of this was happening at just the time when workers' futures were going up in smoke very often. And the result is that that people in the middle got very, 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 very angry. My crowd, of course, and includes me. I mean, I'm very focused on climate change. But when I was reading about the Yellow Vest movement in France, there was one very common sign that said Macron, who of course was the French president representing, in this case, the Brahmin left. Macron cares about the end of the world. We care about the end of the month. And that's exactly the kind of culture clash that the far right has weaponized so effectively. And it's really a one-trick pony, but they only need the one trick because we keep falling into the trap. And I've been saying the same thing for 20 years. It's really actually time to stop falling for the same old move.
In your sort of story, you didn't mention the Vietnam War that I think play a pretty crucial role because I think that is the Vietnam War generation that became Democrat because of the opposition at the war to Vietnam, and basically started to gain power in Congress after the Watergate scandal. And that generation is the generation of the Watergate babies, as they were called, are the ones that started to look down to the union workers, who, by the way, supported the war for Vietnam. So what role did the Vietnam War play in all this?
The Vietnam War did play a role in the hippie revolt, which was, in retrospect, a revolt of upper middle class kids against their upper middle class parents, and so was read by blue collar people as just another exercise of privilege by irresponsible elite kids who didn't need to seek security because the security was daddy's bank account. So the issues that created this cultural rift that eventually became a cultural difference between elites and non-elites. You're right. The Vietnam War was a very central role in that. We see the echoes, though, today, and this is particularly true in Europe, but it's also very true in the United States. There is no far-right populist movement that has been successful without centering the issue of immigration. And the issue of immigration is similar to the Vietnam War issue. And it goes back to a very human instinct, which is to stress whatever form of high status you have. So my crowd, we stress that we're members of a global elite. We stress class because that's the highest status we have. But Americans, and this is true of Italians too, and many other countries in Europe, people who are British, one of the highest, but working class, being British is one of the highest status categories that they inhabit. And so working class people are more patriotic than elites are, because each group is stressing the status that gives them social honor. It's what I call the scrum for social honor, which is a very important spring of a lot of social behavior. And so you have elites, you have the Americans back in the Vietnam War, the middle-class Americans, very patriotic, and elites not patriotic, even burning flags and such. And in the way this plays out in Europe is that you have a Brahmin elite that is very pro-Europe, and you have middle-class Italians that are voting for Giorgia Meloni. So this is the sort of globalism versus patriotism vector of politics that's been going on since the Vietnam War is also an artifact of this class dynamic that I'm trying to describe.
One of the other interesting things you articulate is this idea of predistribution versus redistribution. And you quote a researcher estimating that nearly half of Democrats' loss of less educated voters over the past several decades can be directly attributed to this focus on redistribution instead of predistribution, where what middle-income Americans want is predistribution. And you note also that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs have strong support for higher taxes in order to support redistribution, but they don't want predistribution. Why did the Democratic Party and the powerful people in the Democratic Party become attached to redistribution as opposed to predistribution?
And just to define the terms, predistribution just means who gets what through the labor market. In the 30s, Democrats were very focused on who gets what through the labor market and through universal government programs to maintain stability so that hard work would lead to a stable middle-class life. In the 70s, and actually even before that in the 60s, though, liberals' attention focused onto the poor. They sort of figured, the working class, they're doing fine. But our empathy, the group that deserves our empathy and activism is the poor. And so we had a new set of, we had two things: a new set of government programs that were means tested, so that you could only you're only eligible if you were quite poor. That actually is a recipe for turning the middle class against government, which is exactly what happened. Because if you get just one notch too far into the middle class, you get zero, and you have to work hard at a not very fulfilling job to pay taxes so that somebody, quote, who isn't working can get benefits. The problem with means-tested programs is that they end up pitting the have-a-littles against the have-nots, to quote one blue-collar homemaker. And very often, Democrats have been attracted to this because, we need to design programs to reach the most vulnerable, quote. One of the things to recognize is that if you do design programs to reach the most vulnerable, they will be politically very, very vulnerable. And the benefits will be, they'll be unstable, they'll be highly stigmatized. That does not make sense. The left has to understand that that's the right move to make programs means tested. The left's move has to be to make programs universal, so that with the tagline, and I've been trying to get people for several years to use this, hard work should pay off. Hard work should yield a stable middle-class standard of living. That's what the left should stand for.
One of the many things I found inside of your book is that they hate our government, they hate our bureaucracy of the middle class is a result of the fact that it used to be the case that government jobs were not particularly desirable. But as the middle class is eroded and as the middle class is dropping and feels a sense of insecurity, the government jobs look much more secure. And to some extent, there is the envy of the middle class that is falling into the lower class, and you start to hate the one that are privileged. And so part of the love for the chainsaw of Elon Musk is the result of that insecurity.
I think that's so insightful. I've been trying to get someone to publish an op-ed saying exactly that. I mean, I have studied the working poor because I did a randomized controlled trial shifting gap sales workers onto more stable schedules. Because, about a generation ago, if you worked in retail, you had a full-time benefited job at Macy's. And then the sort of 1% figured out they could make more money if they gave everybody part-time jobs without benefits and unstable schedules, so that nobody would ever work 1 hour when they weren't being, quote, productive. And so you have the growth of precarity, it's often called, in working class jobs. What Musk is doing is creating exactly the same kinds of precarity in government jobs. And that makes sense. That makes sense. From the point of view of the 1%, it's fantastic if people are terrified every day of the week they're going to lose their jobs. It makes the power over them virtually absolute.
I couldn't tell if this was a source of optimism for the left or a source of incredible pessimism for us all, that you've argued that part of the solution is sort of ironic in that life is getting harder for everyone, that the path forward is to link some of the economic woes of the missing middle with those of younger college-educated voters who are also now struggling to buy homes, afford childcare, provide good jobs. So is that a positive, or is it actually a huge negative for the state of our economy? Or is it both?
Certainly, in terms of the coalition, one of the challenges has been that the Brahmin left has priorities that are not particularly economic. They're climate change, racial justice, abortion rights, all of which I prioritize, of course. But the issue is not what makes me feel whole. The issue is, do I have a coalition that can win? So if you're focusing attention on, do I have a coalition that can win, you have to talk to other people and find out what they want if you want them to join you. And so the little silver lining is that, and Doge just really dramatizes this, but so does the swing of younger voters to Trump, particularly men, reflected younger voters, even some of them with college degrees, that were so angry because they, by their failure to launch economically, that they went to the guy talking about economics, not to the girl talking about defense of democracy and abortion rights. So am I happy that the middle class, that the college educated people's future now sucks as bad as working class people's? No, I'm not happy. But it does present an opportunity to focus the Brahmin left back on economic issues.
So I really appreciate your criticism from the inside, because very few people are able to do it. But maybe you go a little bit too far in that direction and not enough in looking at the bigger picture. Because my view, before reading your book, my view was that the reason why all the debate is cultural is because was basically in the interest of the money elite to have this debate, because both parties economically are very similar. They need to differentiate themselves for the election and to pretend that there is a democracy, and they differentiate on the things that is orthogonal to money, which is gender, civil rights, etc. And in a sense, the Brahmin elite got the cake in 82 for most of this period because they became rich, they got most of their civil rights, and yeah, occasionally they won an election, but until and this is 2016 was really an accident for 30,000 votes in a different direction. They would have done so. In a sense, everything was working fine. I think it's 2024, which is really the watershed where they realize that they're losing. But by and large, this mechanism worked, and I think was, in my interpretation, all financed by the huge influx of money in election. So the reason why the economic rights are off the table is because the donors, both the Democrats and the Republican donors, want them off the side. That's not necessarily the fault of the Brahmin left. The fault of the Brahmin left is not to understand the game.
I actually partly agree, but partly disagree with you. People like Rupert Murdoch understood and tolerated intensely anti-elitist rhetoric, including railing against economic elites, and has for decades. One study of Tucker Carlson found that in a 4 or 5 year period, found that something like 70% of his programs railed against elites. And of course, that's part of the Murdoch empire. So the far right has always understood that they need to tolerate anti-elitism. Democrats haven't. Democratic donors haven't.
So, as you know, there is a lot of soul searching on the left, the Democratic Party, of what the new platform should be. And particularly, there is another book that is receiving a lot of attention among the Brahmin left. That is the book Abundance by Ezra Klein and
Yes.
Derek Thompson. So, what do you think of that book as an alternative to your position?
I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's solving for a very specific problem. Certainly, the idea that we have to communicate that we on the left are working towards a society where everybody has access to housing, to good jobs, abundance in that way. Totally right. That's totally right. Also, the idea that we on the left should acknowledge that regulations sometimes have been abused and have not been designed to be very user friendly, and is also very, very important and very well taken. On the other hand, I think that's getting at a very important slice of the problem. But I think that in order to really turn this situation around, we're going to have to stop asking what's the matter with Kansas and start asking what's the matter with Cambridge. We're going to have to understand that our preferences, our politics, our values, our ideals in the Brahmin left, they're very class-based. And that if we want a coalition, we have to not just live our values, because that's living out our class privilege. We have to have that leap of imagination to understand what the life is of somebody who doesn't have the same horizons and the same privilege that we do, and see how we can connect with what they want. The abundance agenda does that in two ways, but we need to do that in many, many ways, including by talking American rather than talking articulate.
Do you worry, this is such a depressing question, but do you worry that with the advent of AI and with the fact that so many jobs are gone, that we've missed the moment, that the damage has been done. And is there? I guess I worry that this is reflection that comes too late in the game, and that there's a new game going forward, and it's not clear what that new game is going to be, but that it's too late to go back and right the wrongs of the past, especially when AI is coming for a lot more of the jobs that we've been talking about.
And the jobs of college educated people.
And the jobs of college educated people too.
You can look at that two ways. I mean, first of all, it sucked when blue collar jobs were lost, and it's going to suck when college educated people's jobs are lost. I think that what we saw in the last election is that young people are already feeling the lack of the affordability crisis. Wait until they lose their jobs.
You were very polite in your response about abundance, but I thought that you would say that what it lacks was more a politics of predistribution, because abundance is very much in the old neoliberal way of we maximize the pie and then we distribute. And there's not much discussion, as far as I remember, of antitrust. And one of the points that I love of your book is you said that one of the defects of the Democratic Party is that in 1992 abandoned an antitrust agenda and resurrected only recently. So isn't that missing from the abundance agenda?
Well, thank you, Luigi. You know what's missing from the abundance agenda? I really like that analysis. I'm going to have to go back and look at the book again with that in mind. Certainly, the out that Democrats have taken for far too long under the influence of neoliberalism is that the path to economic stability for everyone was in more growth, more growth, more growth. And one of the things that we've seen loud and clear since 2016, and the tariffs, God knows, express this, is that people who formerly had a stable middle class life who now don't, who are on the edge of this precarity, they do not care about economic growth if they don't get their bite of the pie. So that is the predistribution part. We can't just grow ourselves out of this. Again, workers' wages used to rise when productivity did in the decades after World War II. If that had continued, workers' wages would be about 42% higher. That has nothing to do with lack of abundance. That has something to do with the problems of distribution, that if you work hard, you should be able to access a stable middle class life, and you can't when your wages are 42% lower than they should be.